Hello again, and welcome to another edition of the Real Ale Guide. Today we've got a special guest on the show. I'm down at Wells & Young's Brewery, and this is Jim, the head brewer.
Hello Simon, nice to meet you.
Yeah, and we've got a few questions for Jim. The first one being, when did you first become interested in beer, and importantly, brewing it?
I think I first became interested in beer when I was quite a young lad, and I guess like a lot of young chaps who have older siblings, you hang around getting in the way where you shouldn't do until they bribe you to go away. And my bribery was probably about a quarter of a bottle of pale ale to go away and behave. So that's when I first got interested in the taste of beer. In terms of brewing, and certainly taking up brewing as a career, it was in my final years at school, where you're going through this sort of idea that you've got to work out what you want to do for a living, and I really didn't want to be a lawyer or an accountant or, in fairness, a train driver. So I looked around at the sort of thing I could do, and brewing seemed like a good idea, so I started to investigate from there.
Fantastic, fantastic. And that was with... what brewery was that with?
Well, funnily enough, I was actually born and brought up in Bedford, and I wrote to the then head brewer of Charles Wells and asked for sponsorship, as one does, and advice. And he kindly wrote back and said no, they wouldn't sponsor me, but they would give me a job during my vacation. So I signed up to go to brewing school, which was Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh.
Right.
And around those times in the 1970s, we actually had a choice. We could have gone to Birmingham or to Edinburgh, but I chose Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And during my vacations, I came back and worked here, and that earned me enough money to enjoy my education at brewing school.
Fantastic.
Beer money, I think you would call it.
Fantastic. Great, great.
It's alright.
Is that you or me?
Hold on, let me stop this one as well.
Thank you.
Still going.
Oh, we're still going anyway, aren't we? Because it's the red one. Do you want me to stop it and start it?
So, Jim, what happened after brewing school then? What did you do after brewing school?
Oh, well, I was actually quite lucky. In my third year up at brewing school, I was interviewed on what they call a milk round by potential employers, and most of the interviewees were fourth years, so students who were just leaving, and I'd put my name down for an interview really just to get experience and practice of my interview technique.
Yeah.
And was interviewed by a gentleman from Imperial Tobacco who owned Courage's.
Oh, right.
And lo and behold, a couple of months later I got a letter inviting me to a second interview in London, which was most unexpected.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, even more unexpected, a couple of weeks after the second interview I got a letter offering me a job.
Fantastic.
As a graduate trainee.
With Courage.
With Courage's in London. So that's where I went after brewing school.
So, to Courage. And at the time, with Courage, what beers were you brewing? What was it the 70s or the 80s back?
This was October 1977.
1977. So what beers were Courage producing back then, which were selling like hotcakes?
Well, Courage Best, that was our #1 product, and Courage Directors, which was our premium product.
Yeah.
So both of those selling well over 1 million barrels, and being brewed in large quantities in the Courage Brewery on the south side of the Thames, and a place called Horsley Down Lane, which sounds very romantic. It didn't feel like it at the time, but I guess as I look back on it with sort of 30-year-old rose-tinted spectacles, it was quite a romantic era to be a brewer.
So then, did you end up coming to Wells and Courage came with you, or what happened with Courage?
No, there was a big gap in the relationship between myself and Courage. I left Courage some 9 years later and joined an engineering company called Briggs,
Right.
who build brewery equipment, and had a fantastic job where I went all around the world selling and commissioning brew houses and breweries. And I did that for about 2.5 years. But having a young family and being out of the country for weeks at a time, it wasn't a particularly popular job with the family.
Yeah.
So in 1989 I was contacted by Charles Wells, the Wells family, and invited to apply for a vacancy that had just cropped up as second brewer.
Fantastic.
So that's when I came back to Bedford in 1989 as second brewer of Charles Wells.
Great. And was the Courage brand already in with Charles Wells, or what was the history with that?
I'm afraid there was another few years to go. So in the late 1980s, Charles Wells was brewing a lot of Red Stripe, but also Eagle Bitter and Bombardier and the Wells brands that we know and love today. It wasn't until 2005 when we got together with Young's and amalgamated the two brewing divisions and formed Wells and Young's, that the whole idea of Courage came onto the agenda. And we were looking at how we could utilise the additional capability and capacity of the brewery here in Bedford.
Yeah.
And at that time, Scottish and Newcastle were interested in selling the Courage brand. So after having just formed the Wells and Young's company, our first acquisition was to buy the Courage brand.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And then you went on to brew the directors here and the Courage Best, which we just tried downstairs. Is that it with Courage, or will you, have they got any other famous brands which you will be looking to produce in the, or resurrect from the?
They do have other brands, and there is at least 2 that I would love to resurrect before I retire.
Yeah.
And I think that probably will be for another episode, Simon.
Yeah, okay. I'll go back to another question. So what's it like being head brewer of Wells and Young's with all its history and heritage? You must be very proud.
I am, and you know, many people say they have the best job in the world, and I think it would take a lot to beat my job. I am a beer person, and I have been a beer person for 30 or 40 years. So what better than to be a head brewer?
Yeah.
But the great thing about Wells and Young's is we're big enough to brew a whole range of beers and service a global audience, but we're small enough that we still care, we still know people in other departments, we touch every part of the business. So I have the best of both worlds. I can be involved in sales and marketing if I wish, or I can be having a really technical, detailed discussion with one of my 8 master brewers, which is probably the thing I enjoy most,
Yeah.
is getting down to the
nitty-gritty.
nitty-gritty of technical brewing with other people who have been highly educated and really know their subject, so you can have a really good discussion and debate about the intricacies of making beer.
Great, fantastic. The next one would be how, I think I've already covered that question, but the question 4 is, real ale and craft beers are really making a great comeback in the UK and around the world. That must fill you with joy. Why do you think this is? What factors are driving the resurgence of real ales?
Crikey, that's a difficult question to answer, Simon. I think, to break it down, yes, I am delighted, and yes, I think craftsmanship is something we don't really value these days. I can remember my father's generation, the craftsmanship of making things by hand, so that could be a steam engine, or in your case, a nice carpenter's cabinet, the value of that seemed to disappear, where everything had to be kind of flat packed and
20,
an easily accessible commodity. And I have to say, many beers came into that category, and whilst I'm sure your viewers could name and shame their own list, that's not my job. I'm not here to rubbish the opposition, but we all know who we're talking about.
Yeah.
And beers had become quite bland and boring and uninteresting and characterless. And then, slowly but surely, through pressure groups like Camera, who had kept the whole interesting real ale going through the dark days of the 60s and 70s as keg beer was all dominant, they nurtured that little bit of craftsmanship, mostly in the regional breweries like Wells and Youngs, or Charles Wells and Youngs as we were then, and kept that flame alive. And now we've got something of a forest fire. We've got 700 microbreweries producing some amazingly different flavoured beers. We've got major TV programmes extolling the virtues of beer and the different variations that we're blessed with. I'm sure brewers like myself take great comfort from that and enjoy that, rather than just producing an aseptic yellow with bubbles product that you really don't need any artistic craftsmanship to make.
Some people might even say it's only good for cleaning glass.
Indeed, they'll probably make a self-cleaning beer to follow it.
Are you attending any beer festivals this year?
Not yet, but it is only the beginning of February. There's 2 or 3 that I'm going to go to. My new favourite one is Philly Beer Week in Philadelphia, which may sound slightly strange from a head brewer of a major UK company. But I was so surprised how the beer culture has changed in America. When I went to Philadelphia last year, I was just blown away, and I loved